There we go. So, Greg, you were telling Marge about some space history, I presume.
Well, they had direct contact with Neil Armstrong back in the day, and we were talking about. They'd said that they remembered exactly where they were when Apollo 11 landed on the moon, and I think everyone remembers that if you're old enough to. And the interesting thing about that, we've had so many major global events in my lifetime, anyway, that everyone remembers where they were. The Kennedy assassination, 9/11. And the landing of the Apollo 11 landing on the moon is the only one that's a positive event, it seems. Everything else was a catastrophe. And, we have a whole lecture on Apollo 11 that we did at the 50th anniversary in 2019. And it's still a fascinating thing, how dangerous that was. And, the odds of success were pretty low. And the astronauts were paid $8 an hour to do that. $8 an hour. They got overtime.
Did they get mileage? Did they get mileage?
Yeah, they should have. 51 cents a mile. That would have added up. But hey, there's some interesting things about the story is that the NASA employee insurance plan did not cover them if they had lost their lives during a mission in space. It was called unusual and hazardous, and so their families would not have been supported had they been lost.
Oh,
That was outrageous. I think it's not that way now, but it was that way back then.
So, Greg, was it just a love of space when you were growing up that got you into this field, or was there someone in particular who inspired you to pursue this?
Well, I was a child of the space race. I mean, I'm 70 this year. And so, in 1961 and 62, when it all started, 57 was Sputnik. And I do still remember that. And, it was a big deal for those that aren't old enough to remember the early days. Racing the Russians to the moon and Kennedy's commitment to landing astronauts there was a national effort. And we were all inspired, all of us. Like many people have heard, it inspired, an entire generation of people to pursue careers in science and technology. I was one of them. I was a senior in high school, had just graduated from Kokomo High School, actually, when Apollo 11 landed at Tranquility Base. And the spring of 1971, I ended up working in mission planning in Houston in mission control for the last 3 flights of Apollo. And so it made a big impression on me.
No, that's neat. I've actually been down there. We'll take our kids to space camp in Galveston a couple of times, where when you pull up to the museum, it's got the full-size 747 with the space shuttle on top. If that doesn't get your curiosity going,
yeah,
I don't know what does. So I've got a list of questions from my daughter that we'll save for Q&A later. And I can't wait to hear what you have to say about some of those questions.
Well, at the end of the presentation, we're going to discuss what we're doing here on Indianapolis North Side with Grand Universe. And it'll be a world-class center for astronomy and space exploration on 70 acres. Purdue is involved. And it's, we plan on making this space. Westfield, Indiana is going to become Space City.
I can't wait. I'm actually 170th and Cary. So I'm about 4 minutes from Grand Park. I didn't know about this project until I saw you on our agenda, our itinerary the past couple of weeks. I am beyond excited personally. And to think of, more commerce going to the Grand Park area, holy cow, it's so neat for that part of the city.
It really is. We can't wait. It's a big project. And it involves a lot of money, and there's an awful lot of people on our team. We certainly have the support of the mayor and his staff, and we just are forging ahead with all this. We'll talk about it at the end of my presentation. I've got some slides to show some things.
Great. No, I appreciate that, Greg. So we will go ahead and start our agenda. So next Thursday is the biggest meeting in recent history, back in person at the Columbia Club for the first time in 14 or 15 months. No cash will be taken. We'll have to register ahead of time. lunch is increased by $1, so it's $21 instead of 20. But as we're looking at this slide with the agenda coming up, in person next week at the Columbia Club, we are trying to stay with the second Thursday as our in-person meeting. Trina and Kel and I were talking with the June 10th My Octopus teacher presented by the zoo. That really is more Zoom friendly. So it looks like June 17th for Mayor Bart will be our in-person meeting for June. In lieu of paying for lunch today, please consider making a donation to the foundation. There'll be a PayPal link in the chat there. Again, for next week, you must register in advance and pay in advance, since, again, we're trying to kind of limit contact between Kelly and the membership. We've got health and safety guidelines. We're following Marion County guidelines, Columbia Club guidelines, 4 people per table. And again, it's Kiwanis Connections. So everybody will be able to get caught up on everything that we've missed over the last year of working from home and sheltering from home. We go on to the next slide. That'd be great. Congratulations to our 2021-22 club officers. We've got Max Harper joining us as secretary, Jackie Clancy, Laura Holloway, Chuck Cotterman, and Wendy Paddock. Chuck, would you mind, I had missed you last week with the 47 things we had on the agenda with 6 time zones between our participants. Chuck, would you mind just introducing yourself for 30 seconds?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Chuck Cotterman. Gosh, I've been a member since 2006, I believe, was my inaugural year. And let's see, I chair the football committee, have for some time with Roger. And I don't know if Bill Du Bois is on. We've had a pretty good run lately. I'm also on Fostering Families Committee with Wendy. And I'm an architect with a firm here in town, Architectura Corporation. I've been a principal for, 20 years there. So we're in our 20th year. And my wife, Jane, and I have 3 children, 2 of which live locally, and 1 lives in Myrtle Beach. He's a firefighter for the county there. And soon to have our 5th grandson, and all of which live within 15 minutes of us. So we're blessed to have, they're all 5 and under. So we've got our hands full when they all get together. So they're a lot of fun. So that's about all for me. Thank you.
No, thanks, Chuck. We're glad to have you. Thanks for your dedication. And we've got Miss Trina Raudebush, who has come on as president-elect following Miss Carol Orbison. So thanks again for everybody who is willing to serve and continue leading our club. We were supposed to have someone from Butler Circle K who was sick, so we'll reschedule that club for another time. And again, our primary fundraising outing of the year, June 15th, we're playing at Eagle Creek. We've got plenty of sponsorship still available. It's $400 per foursome, basically up until Memorial Day. And it'll be a little bump as we're trying to stay as organized as possible. So Kelly has the registration forms. The links are in the Monday weekly emails. So please consider coming out for our annual scramble. I am going to turn it over to Mr. Jason Burke, who will introduce today's speaker, Greg McCauley from Grand Universe.
Thank you, Eric. Welcome and hello to everyone. While I don't know Greg personally, my first interaction with him was when we were talking at the Mooresville Library, or he was talking at the Mooresville Library, giving a presentation on the spacecraft, which I now forget what it was called, but it was the one that went by Pluto and sent back our first images of Pluto. And I had come across that presentation because I was looking into your work at the Goff Link Observatory near Brooklyn, which is where all of my family came from originally as they settled in Indiana. So really neat area. Maybe you can mention a couple things about that, because it appears that you have moved on to Westfield at this point, doing something really grand, no pun intended. But Greg is the president and CEO and founder of Grand Universe, and is the former CEO of a national medical diagnostic imaging company. He worked for NASA at the Manned Spacecraft Center, now Johnson Space Center in Houston. He worked in mission planning and analysis for the lunar missions of Apollo 15, 16, and 17, and in engineering support for mission control, where he held a NASA top secret clearance. That sounds really exciting. He was a member of the Lunar Launch Team for Apollo 17, where he created maps of the lunar surface for the astronauts used as they explored the moon and the lunar rover. And in addition to his duties at Grand Universe, he's a professional science communicator as a member of the NASA Museum Alliance, and lectures throughout the Midwest on NASA missions, astronomy, and space exploration. I'm sure he'll tell us more about the Grand Universe they're developing in Westfield. He's a wonderful speaker and super interesting to listen to. So welcome, and thank you for coming this week.
Why, thank you. That was terrific. Thank you very much. And you were in Mooresville before I share the screen. You had visited that was called New Horizons. That was the New Horizons mission to Pluto. I remember giving that lecture because we had created animations where we flew along with the spacecraft as it zipped by 8,000 miles off the surface of Pluto. Remember, that was like 60,000 miles an hour.
Yeah, you know, my favorite thing about that whole presentation was you had mentioned the engineers designing that past whatever flyby had to hit a very, very small window at Jupiter in order to get anywhere close to Pluto, and it's like they nailed it. You just couldn't have done it any better. So it's fantastic.
Well, you know, one more thing before I share the screen with the Mars presentation. That New Horizons mission was so incredible as far as a STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, as far as how it applies to STEM, because when we launched that, it was a 9-year mission. It took 9 years to get to Pluto. It's 3.5 billion miles away. And when we launched New Horizons, we didn't really fully understand the orbital trajectory of Pluto around the sun. And so we launched it not even knowing where Pluto was going to be once we arrived, understanding that we had time to reevaluate the orbit and then upload that data to the spacecraft. And so the thought behind that is that you don't need to know everything before you get started. Just get started, and you can figure out things on the fly. And so it's a great story about that whole mission. But anyway, thanks a lot for the nice introduction. I'll talk about the Link Observatory at the end because we're still out there. It just happens to still be closed because of COVID. It's been closed over a year now out there. So thank you very much. And can I share the screen now? I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share and get this all started. Okay, here we go. Let me minimize all this on my screen. Okay, thank you again for having me. I've been looking forward to this. One of my favorite subjects is this mission to Mars that we're all anticipating. This virtual lecture series that we've been doing virtually for over a year now is called Starbound, Sharing the Wonders of the Universe. And all of our series that are virtually produced are done by our digital media team here at Grand Universe. And although you've already did a great job of introducing me, I kind of put this up here anyway. I'm founder and president of Grand Universe. Again, I'm a former NASA employee during the Apollo program at the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston, Texas, which it was called back in those days. In the mid 70s, late 70s, I think it was changed to the Johnson Space Center after former President Johnson had passed away. I worked in mission planning and analysis for the last 3 flights of Apollo. While I was there, I was 21 years old, and it was just kind of one of those dream jobs of a lifetime. I was on the Lunar Launch Team for Apollo 17 and specialized in lunar rover operations. And it was nice that you had mentioned that I was the one that created the maps that they used. It was on a little clippy thing on the center console of the lunar rover. And it was a map of the landing zone that showed where they were going to drive their lunar rover and where they're going to plant these ALSEP experiments, which was the lunar surface experiments programs, the seismometers and the et cetera that they place on the surface. And it also had designated certain spots where the lunar geologists wanted samples taken. And so those were my maps. I did not determine where those locations were. That was done by others. I was just the one that made the map that made its way to the moon. So it was exciting times. I held a NASA top secret clearance. Most of us in mission planning did. That's a civilian clearance. It was not a military clearance. And so, I'm under no non-disclosure agreement, so I can talk about anything, I guess, now, and without violating anything. And I was also in engineering support for mission control. So during the missions themselves, we had access to mission control and had our own mission control badge, and it was just exciting times. And so, what we're going to talk about this afternoon is our mission to Mars, mankind's journey to the red planet. And if you'll take a look at this, all of us, sometime in grade school, I think it's 5th grade now these days. I forget when it was when I was that young. We all studied the solar system. And typically, this is what we studied. This view of the solar system is not accurate as far as distances between the sun and the planets. And that's nearly impossible. It is actually impossible to do in a graphic that makes any sense because of the vast distances involved. If we had a picture of the sun that was at that size right there, Neptune would be, about 800 yards away or something like that. And so this is compressed. The distances are compressed, but it shows the position of the planets, which I'm sure you're all aware of. If we start down at the kind of a lower right-hand side of the sun, that innermost planet is Mercury, of course, and then Venus, and then Earth with Earth's moon. And then the next one to the right, furthest to the right, is Mars. And then just outside of Mars, you'll see those rocky things. That's called the asteroid belt. And then you go up to the upper left-hand side, and that's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. You'll notice that Pluto that we were discussing is not there. That's because Pluto has been declassified several years ago and is no longer a planet. It's called a dwarf planet. And a lot of people are upset about that. But there's a lot of reasons why Pluto really isn't a natural part of the main development of our solar system. Its orbit's much different, et cetera. We won't get into that. The reason for this picture right here, go back to the right-hand side of the screen and look at that little distance between Earth and Mars. I mean, it's like an inch away. And so, at least in this picture. And so what's the big deal about flying to Mars? Why did we not? Here's a good question. We were just talking about the Apollo programs. Why did we not then, in the early 70s, when we were done with Apollo 17, which was the last flight to the moon, why did we not just go to Mars? Were we not ready? And the answer is, I don't believe we were ready to go to the moon, to tell you the truth. I mean, this was every time we launched a manned mission to the moon, we were just rolling the dice, and we were way out in front of the normal technology. Most of the technology and the craft and certainly the software wasn't even a word back then. Most of that had to be invented to get us to the moon. So we were really kind of pushing the envelope to get people to the moon, and thankfully we did so without a loss of life in those missions. After Apollo 1 fire on the pad, but we lost no one in space, which is terrific. And so why did we not go onto Mars? Because it is completely different than going to the moon. And that's what we're going to discuss today. So you kind of get an understanding of how difficult it is to get a mission to Mars, let alone a manned mission to Mars. And so let's move on. And this is an animated diagram of the solar system looking from 10 billion miles away or so. And these are the orbits of the planets around the sun. Now they're sped up quite a bit by hundreds of times. You can see that innermost planet, Mercury, how it orbits around the sun. Actually, Mercury's year, if I could say it that way, one orbit around the sun is a year for a planet, at least it is for us. One orbit around the sun's 87.9 days, or about 88 days. And as you can see, it orbits around that sun right there about once every second or so. And so we've sped these things up, but what we wanted to show you was the relative speed between the planets. And those relative speeds that you're looking at there are accurate. They're all sped up equally. And so if you look at the third planet out, the blue one that's slowly moving around, that's the Earth. And of course, it takes the Earth 365 and a quarter days to get all the way around the sun once. And then there's Mars and Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus and Neptune. If you look way out at the end, you'll see that those planets are barely moving. They actually are, but if you look at the left-hand side, that text we have up there, go all the way to the bottom, number 8. Neptune takes 165 years to go around the sun once. And so a Neptune year, is relative to the Earth, is 165 Earth years long. And of course, the further you get away from the sun, the farther you have to travel, because the larger the circumference of the orbit and the more time it takes to make one lap around the sun. And this is important in our discussion, because if you'll look back on that list on the upper left-hand corner of the screen, you'll see that Earth and Mars are in blue. What we're trying to help everyone understand is the difference between a Earth year and a Mars year, the difference between how fast they orbit around the sun. Take a look at this diagram. Well, let me give you some facts, and then we'll go to that orbital diagram. Here are some Mars facts. Mars and Earth have about the same land mass. Now, if you look at that picture in the lower right-hand corner, the diameter of Mars is about 4,200 miles. The diameter of Earth is almost 8,000 miles. And so Mars is a little larger than half the size of the Earth. And yet they have the same land mass. And what we mean by that is if you would just drain all the oceans and squeeze all of the continents together, the dry land together on Earth, it would equal the same amount of dry land that's on Mars. Mars is about 1% of the Earth's atmospheric pressure, and that's all in carbon dioxide. And what that means is that the atmospheric pressure on Mars is 99% lower than it is on Earth. As a matter of fact, we're now flying the Mars helicopter on the surface of Mars. Just recently flew that, which was an historic event, because the Mars helicopter was made to fly in that very thin atmosphere. And that's now that we have tested and flown on the surface of Mars, it has completely changed the way we're going to explore that planet in the future. We will be sending eventually swarms of drones up to Mars to be launched in various directions and circumnavigate the planet sometime, sending back information to a land-based rover that then sends that information back to Earth. And so we are the aliens on Mars. We are flying the Martian skies today. And to make that example a little bit more clear, to flying on the surface of Mars is like flying at 100,000 feet here on Earth. The atmospheric pressure on Mars at the surface is about the same as Earth's atmospheric pressure at 100,000 feet, which isn't much. And we don't have a lot of planes that can fly up there because the air is so thin. Martian surface gravity is only about 37% of Earth's gravity. So if you weighed 100 pounds on Earth, you'd only weigh 37 pounds on Mars. So it's a great diet plan to go up there. And there's some things we could talk about later on about when and if we ever colonize that planet Mars, and babies are born on the planet Mars that has 37% of the Earth's gravity. You must understand that as those children grow on Mars, on our Mars colony, they will never be able to visit Earth, because at 1G, their cardiovascular system would be so taxed, it would be dangerous to their lives. And so as we colonize Mars in the future, and I believe we will have people that will be born and raised and live forever on Mars and never come to Earth. And that's something to think about. We could talk about that at some other time. The surface temperature of Mars has a range of 243 degrees below zero up to about 68 degrees, kind of a balmy summer day on the Mars equator of nearly 70 degrees. So it's not all that much different from Earth. It has the largest canyon and the highest mountain in the solar system. As a matter of fact, Mount Olympus Mons, the largest mountain on Mars and in the solar system, has the base about the size of the state of Arizona, and it's 75,000 feet to the peak, which is 3 or 4 times the height of Mount Everest, many more. It's enormous. And we have discovered Mars, water on the surface of Mars, under the surface. We discovered a lot of other things recently on Mars, and we'll talk about that as we go. Here is this orbital plan that I want to show you, because it makes sense during this presentation about why it's so difficult to fly a mission to Mars, certainly a manned mission. There comes a point in time, if you'll look at this diagram, where Mars is in opposition to Earth. And what that means is that Mars and Earth are the closest together in their orbits in any period of time. That's called opposition. And when Mars is closest to Earth, as it's shown in this diagram, it's about 47 million miles away from the planet. And so if we were going to communicate with a civilization on Mars, a colony on Mars, that communication time would take about 3 minutes of travel time one way. The radio communications travel at the speed of light, which is 186,000 miles per second. And if you divide that in to 47 million miles, that's about 3 minutes of travel time for a radio communication between the two planets. That's one way. And so if mission control were to send a notice over the radio to our colony on Mars, it would take 3 minutes to get there. If they would respond, it would take 3 minutes to get back. And so communications are difficult because at its very closest, it's a 6-minute round trip. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go 1 year later. And the reason I showed you opposition is because this is when we launch missions to Mars, when we're closest together. It only makes sense because it takes the least amount of time and the least amount of fuel because we are closest together in our orbits. So let's start this animation. Here we go. 1 year later, Mars goes halfway around the sun. The Earth goes one complete lap around the sun. That was 1 year later. Now, Mars is in a position called conjunction. And it's not 47 million miles from Earth anymore. It's 249 million miles. And on the other side of the sun. And so we have only one opportunity every 24 months, about 26 months actually, to launch to Mars. And that's during the period where we're closest together. So now we'll forward this animation again. One point I want to make before we continue is the communication time at this point is now 21 minutes because Mars is so much further away from Earth. And so if there was an emergency on Mars and they had to call mission control for advice or counsel to manage the emergency, that radio communication at this point, when we're on the other side of the sun from Mars, would take 21 minutes to get to Earth. We would then return with the answer, which would take 21 minutes to get back. That's a minimum of 42 minutes round trip. That is not the way to handle emergency communications. And so it becomes obvious that if we're going to send humans to Mars, they have to be completely autonomous. They cannot rely on mission control or the people here on Earth to be able to handle emergency situations like we did back on the moon. When we were launching Apollo to the moon, the transit time and communications was 1.5 seconds. So there was a 3-second gap round trip between communications, a much easier way to communicate. So now let's watch a 2-year period. Here goes the Earth. That's 1 year. And now this is 2 years. We are back at opposition. Actually, it's about 26 months, a couple of months after 2 years. But you can see that if we're going to launch a mission from Earth to Mars, or launch a mission returning from Mars back to Earth, it has to take place in opposition. It takes the least amount of time and the least amount of fuel. So if we're going to send a manned mission, a human mission to Mars, we can only launch from Earth to Mars or Mars to Earth once every 2 years. Let's take a look at how that compared with the Apollo program. Apollo 17 was, we spent the most time on the lunar surface of any of the Apollo flights, almost 4 days on the surface. But Apollo 17, along with the rest of the Apollo missions, took 3 days out. It took 3 days to get from the Earth to the moon. The moon is about 235,000 miles from Earth about. It's got somewhat of an elliptical orbit, but the average is about 235,000 miles. 3 days to get out. We spent 4 days on the surface on Apollo 17, launched off the surface, and it took 3 days to get back. The total mission time in that case was 10 days. And so from the time they left Earth until the time they splashed down in the Pacific Ocean, the mission took 10 days. Now look at the bottom, a mission to Mars. It's 5 months out at the minimum to get from Earth to Mars. You saw why. If we launch during opposition, it's 48 million miles almost. And so at 60,000 miles an hour, which is much faster than we traveled to the moon, it takes about 5 months to get out there. It's going to take, no matter how you look at it, it's going to take 5 months to get back at the quickest, because they're going to launch during opposition against. That's 10 months. But there's a launch window once every 26 months. That means that they have to spend 16 months at Mars, because of the configuration of the planets relative to their orbit around the Earth. And so 5 months out, 5 months back is 10 months in transit, but you can only launch every 26 months. So they have to spend 16 months at Mars, good or bad, safe or unsafe. We are obligated to spend that much time on the surface of Mars because of the orbital dynamics of the two planets. I wanted to make that clear. Things get very difficult when you look at the relationship between these two planets. Now, our mission to Mars, we'll look at two major players, SpaceX, you've all heard of them, and NASA, we've of course all heard of them. Let's start with SpaceX. There's Elon Musk. Elon Musk has a mission. It's called From Early Exploration to a Self-Sustaining City on Mars. Let's take a look at how this is going to work. There is the Elon Musk SpaceX, what's called Starship. And if you'll look at the Starship in the center of this image, there is the shuttle next to it. Now, the shuttle has nothing to do with our mission to Mars. We put an image of the shuttle next to the Starship that SpaceX has built to show you the difference in size. And on that image on the left, the shuttle is on the top, the Starship's on the bottom. Again, there's no relationship. The shuttle's been retired and will remain that way. These are the size differences between the two. On the right-hand side is kind of a forward look at how they've kind of relate to each other as far as size and shape. If you would look at our missions into space, our manned missions, on the far left is the space shuttle. And then just to the right of that is the Apollo Saturn V, that magnificent engine, that magnificent rocket that we built for the Apollo program back in the 60s. The next one is called NASA SLS, and that stands for the Space Launch System. NASA is currently building that for our Artemis mission to the moon, which is scheduled to happen sometime in 2024. And it's been picked up, of course, by the new White House administration. So it looks like we're going to move forward with that mission, and that's great. And then the one on the far right is the SpaceX Starship with it. The point I wanted to make here is the amount of thrust that each of these launch vehicles produced. 6.8 million pounds of thrust for the shuttle, 7.5 million pounds of thrust for Saturn V. Take a look at the amount of thrust on SpaceX Starship. It's absolutely enormous compared with the Saturn V. And the Saturn V shook the Earth when it launched. back during the Apollo days. Right in the middle there is 8.8 million pounds of thrust for NASA's SLS, which is, again, bigger than Saturn V. This is the SpaceX Starship, kind of a closer look at it. I think that most of you had heard that they're doing some testing in Texas on launching and re-landing the Starship. And we'll talk about that here in a second. But Starship kind of operates like this. This is the trajectory, the entry, interface, and landing of the Starship as it comes back from the moon or back from Mars. It's kind of it's interesting how it works. It's different than everything else that has been launched in the past. As you can see on the upper left-hand corner is we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Number 1 is atmospheric entry. As the Starship enters the atmosphere, as it's coming back from the moon or as it's coming in from Mars, it's coming in at Mach 25, which is about 19,000 miles an hour. It then enters the Earth's atmosphere at about 400,000 feet and gets into what's called hypersonic flight. Hypersonic is anything over Mach 5. And so it kind of operates like a shuttle. It comes in a horizontal fashion. The bottom of the spacecraft acts as a brake, an air brake, and there's a heat shield along the bottom portions of the Starship, much like the space shuttle. It then continues to slow down to supersonic flight there, number 3. Excuse me. Number 4, it slows down more to subsonic flight, which means that it's below the sound barrier, which is about 725 miles an hour. And then number 5, there's a process that's called reorientation. And as it slows down, and starts to approach Earth at about 10,000 feet, the reorientation takes place and it reorients itself to a vertical position. And the engines fire back up in a retro burn, slows the spacecraft down, and it lands vertically on a pad. And so the reason this becomes important is because it's reusable. This current simulation and testing is happening right now. Just yesterday, they launched what was called SN15, which is the 15th test flight of the Starship. And that's happening down in Texas. And they don't launch it into space. They launch it off the launch pad up to about 60,000 feet, I believe it is. And then the engines go off. It flattens out to a horizontal descent and then slows itself down and then goes through that number 5 reorientation. The engines fire back up and it lands itself back on the pad. SpaceX has been doing that for quite some time, but they just started testing the Starship. The first 15, 14 times it crashed and exploded on the pad. Yesterday, they successfully landed it right side up. They were unmanned. There was no people on board, but they were testing the capabilities of the Starship, and now they have proven that they can accomplish their mission. This was the picture of the launch of the Starship at the Boca Chica site in South Texas on December 8th, 2020. It flew up, not into space, straight up to about 60,000 feet. The engine shut off. It again flew horizontally as it was dropping back down through the atmosphere. It pitched the nose back up to re-land on the pad, and the first 14 flights, I believe it was, ended up like this. And nobody was on board. SpaceX was not concerned about this because this is research and development, and this is just what it takes. And this is actually the Boca Chica site, December 11th, 2020. And so there's been a lot of interesting things that has happened since. But one thing that I want to do before we move on is I want to kind of create a scenario for you, because so many historic things have happened in the last couple of years in spaceflight that have changed our future in human spaceflight. And it's all because of SpaceX. Imagine, if you would, getting on a airliner in New York City and flying a jumbo jet across the ocean and landing in London. Many of you have traveled all over the country, traveled around the world, I'm certain. But imagine this. You get on the jumbo jet, you fly across the Atlantic, you land in London, about 250 to 300 people on board. All of you deplane at Heathrow Airport. And once the plane is empty, they put a towing vehicle onto the plane, they tow it out to a scrap yard, and they completely scrap the entire plane. And then back in New York, they're building a new plane. And they build another multi-million-dollar jet. And once it's complete and tested, then the next group of passengers gets on board and they fly from New York to London Heathrow, and all 300 of them get off. And once everybody's off the plane, the towing vehicle comes around, takes a hold of the plane, takes it over to the junkyard, and they completely scrap it. And every time they make a flight, they build a brand new $100 million jet. Now, we don't do things that way. I mean, how ridiculous is that? How ridiculous does that sound? I mean, who on earth would even think that that was the way to go? The cost of shipping people over the Atlantic Oceans is so high that none of us would ever be flying commercially because they have to build a new plane every time. We have been flying into space just that way since the 1960s. Every launch vehicle that NASA has launched never comes back, never. It either crashes into the ocean someplace, ends up going in orbit and then deorbiting and burning up in the orbit, or stays permanently in Earth or solar orbit for eons, or crashes on the surface of the moon or some planet that we're exploring in a solar system. But the fact that we don't reuse our vehicles is so cost prohibitive that it would make human space colonization of the moon or Mars economically impossible. What SpaceX has done is that they re-land and reuse everything. And so one of their boosters can be relaunched 25 times. As a matter of fact, we just sent a crew of 4 on a SpaceX Dragon up to the International Space Station, and the booster they used had been used before. And it was the first time we had reused a booster to send people into space. And so now if we reuse those vehicles over and over and over again, there will someday be tickets to the moon or to Mars inexpensive enough that our children or our grandchildren or our great-grandchildren will be able to travel to Mars just like we travel to London. And it's all because we can reuse the spacecraft, which makes it economically possible to get involved in mass transit in our solar system. So if you look at this timeline on the picture, the image that we have here, it is 2021, and SpaceX timeline to Mars was that they were doing orbital flights in 2020 of the SpaceX Dragon. They're about a year behind schedule, probably because of the COVID pandemic. And right now we're probably mid-2021. That's going to be occurring. They'll be actually launching in orbit that Starship. An early uncrewed moon mission will probably be sometime in 2022. We're kind of shifting 1 year later because of COVID. After that, they're going to send cargo missions to Mars, unmanned, but they're going to be flying and landing supplies and building materials at a designated landing site on Mars, unmanned, all remotely operated. And then sometime in 2023, now 2024 probably, SpaceX has a mission called Dear Moon. And SpaceX is kind of famous for odd names. NASA would never name anything like that, but it's called Dear Moon, and it's a crewed moon mission. They already have paid passengers for that one. They are not going to land. I will make that clear. They're going to do like an Apollo 8 mission where they're going to fly out, drop into orbit around the moon a few times, and then fly back to Earth. They are not going to land. And so Dear Moon crewed mission will be a mission of non-astronauts. These are civilians traveling and orbiting around the moon and coming home. And then sometime late 2024, 2025, crewed missions to Mars on the spaceship. And so that is the Mars Starship, I'm sorry. That's the Mars SpaceX timeline. And then the question I guess we're going to have to ask is this really going to happen? Take a look at that picture. That is after multiple landings on the surface of Mars. They are building from early exploration to a self-sustaining city on Mars. Is this actually going to happen? My opinion is absolutely. We have been exploring planet Earth since the 1500s on our sailing ships. We have explored every corner of the planet because that's who we are. The new ocean is space, and we are now extending our spirit of exploration into the solar system. It's because who we are. That's who we are. Now, is it going to happen by 2024 or 2025? That just remains to be seen. But this is going to happen someday, and I hope we're all around to see this actually happen. Now, let's go to NASA's journey to Mars. And this is what NASA has planned. This is NASA's Space Launch System, which is the SLS booster that you see. That's Project Orion, which is on its way to hopefully landing on the moon in 2024. If you look at that orange fuel tank and the strap-on rockets on the side, and that service and command module and the launch escape system tower, none of that is reusable. And my opinion, I love NASA, I always have, but they need to kind of get with it, because reusable spacecraft is the future of space exploration, and NASA currently is not engaged in creating launch vehicles or spacecraft that are reusable. That has to change. But this is NASA's plans to the moon and then on to Mars. This is the Orion multi-purpose vehicle. This is a look at it. That on the right-hand side is what's called the command module. There are 3 to 6 astronauts in there. It can seat multiple people, and it kind of looks like a larger version of the Apollo command module. It has solar panels to supply energy, and there's a service module and a booster behind it so that it can maneuver in space. There's fuel tanks involved, et cetera. Currently, we have done 25 years of experiments in human physiology and zero-G on the International Space Station. We've had people that have lived on the space station for over a year and upwards to 2 years now, so they can simulate a mission to Mars and see the physiological and emotional effects on being in microgravity for that long a period of time. In 2021, we are now on our way to uncrewed missions to the moon, and we're reaching out to our new habitat on the moon sometimes in 2028, after we have landed on the moon and have established a colony on the moon, which we certainly will, at Shackleton Crater, which is on the southern pole, at the very south pole of the moon. That is an analog of the domed habitats that we're going to be deploying on Mars. And so the moon becomes a stopover point so we can understand the processes and technologies of actually sustaining a small population off planet Earth on the moon, learning what we need to learn close to Earth, and then that becomes the analog and the processes that we will then take to Mars. And so the timeline for NASA as of now is in the late 2020s, 2028 to 2030. We will then be making our manned mission to Mars. And they plan on not having a habitat in the beginning, but Lockheed Martin, and this is an image from them, their Mars base camp is an orbital platform around the surface of Mars. What Lockheed Martin has proposed for NASA's manned journey to Mars is that we have this orbiting platform around Mars, much like the International Space Station is an orbiting platform around Earth. And the reason for that, and it's a much smaller version, as you see, but the reason for that is the surface of Mars is dangerous. It has only 1% of the Earth's atmosphere, which is dangerous enough in itself. We can't walk around without a spacesuit. What makes it more dangerous is the fact that there's no magnetic field around Mars to speak of, and there is so little atmosphere that solar radiation on the surface of Mars becomes a problem. And so by roving around and living on the surface of Mars, our people will be exposed to ultimately high doses of gamma radiation, et cetera, from the solar wind. And so considerations need to be made in our habitat on Mars to be able to shield us from radiation on the surface. And as a side note, and you may or may not know this, Purdue University in West Lafayette in 2019 received, which will eventually be a $25 million grant from NASA to do the research and development of the first Mars habitat for our astronauts on the surface of Mars. And that's being done at a place called the RETHI Lab, R-E-T-H-I, which stands for Resilient Extraterrestrial Habitat, which is in Discovery Park, which is our research park in West Lafayette. So exciting things happening about this mission to Mars right here in the state of Indiana. And so Lockheed Martin has proposed this orbital platform. The astronauts will stay on board the platform. They have medical facilities and a little workout thing to keep their health going. They've got sleeping quarters, etc., on board. And then when they are about to fly over their landing zone, they will get into what's called the MADV, or the Mars Ascent Descent Vehicle. This will be built on Earth. It will go up and dock with the Mars base camp in orbit around the planet Mars. When the astronauts are ready to descend to the surface of Mars, they climb on board this Mars Ascent Descent Vehicle, and they drift down, fall down, and then eventually land vertically on the surface of Mars. And as you can see, the hatch to the cockpit is way up about 60 feet off the surface. And there's, you can see this little platform they'll get on, like an elevator that takes them down to the surface. And then underneath where the engines are cargo bays. And on those cargo bays will be electric four-wheel drive vehicles, much like ATV here on Earth. How much fun would that be? They'll be able to explore the surface. When they're done, they drive the ATVs back up the ramp and secure them in place, get back up on the elevator, take the elevator to the top, launch themselves off the surface of Mars, redock with the Mars base camp in orbit around the planet, and that's where they'll live in orbit. So this is NASA's plan to go to Mars. Very expensive, but you will see if this stays this way or not. But as you look at this, that vehicle is reminiscent of the SpaceX Starship, which would simply fly directly to Mars and make a direct approach and landing. So we'll see how all this pans out in the next decade or so, but that's NASA's plan to get to Mars and SpaceX plan to get to Mars. And so here is what's called the evolution of a Martian. And it started off with that small little rover called Pathfinder on the left, and went all the way up to a human walking on the surface of Mars. And so it is our opinion, and the opinion of many, that we are witnessing the greatest adventure in human history. We're all witnessing this happening. The first humans on Mars are alive on Earth today. Just contemplate that. The first humans to walk down the ladder and step foot on the Mars surface, when we become literally a multi-planetary civilization, those people are probably in middle school right now. Who are they? Maybe they're your grandkids. Maybe they're your kids. Maybe they'll be your great-grandkids. Maybe they live in Indianapolis or Carmel. Maybe they live in Elwood. I mean, Wapakoneta, Ohio, came Neil Armstrong. Who would have known? Just think of this. The first people to walk on the surface are walking around on Earth sometime, someplace right now. The journey is about to begin. Let's let it happen. And so, wrapping this up, coming soon, we've been excited to kind of expose this to everyone. The Center for Astronomy and Space Exploration, a world-class space science center in central Indiana, bringing science to life, changing the world. This is an architectural view from Fanning Howie, our architects of Grand Universe. Our mission is to ignite and sustain lifelong learning in science and technology. Grand Universe invites curious minds from all backgrounds to explore, create, and pursue their dreams. Our vision is that Grand Universe connects people, communities, and institutions to one another through the wonder of space exploration, so we can explore together and create a better world for everyone. This is an image of Grand Park. I'm sure that most of you have heard about this or have been out there. If you got kids or grandkids in soccer or baseball, you've probably been there many, many times. This is Grand Park. Had 2.5 million visitors in 2019, a little less 2020 because of the situation. But take a look at that red line that goes from the top center down. That's the Moon on Trail. That borders the east side of the baseball diamonds. Just to the east of that is our property where Grand Universe is being built. This is an overview of the Center for Astronomy and Space Exploration. Excuse me. It's 150,000 square feet, 350 feet wide, 150 feet deep, 95 feet high. We have removed the roof panels. It looks a little odd, I know. We have removed the roof panels in this diagram to get a better understanding of what it looks like inside. It will certainly have a solid roof. We will have the largest planetarium in the state of Indiana, all 360 surround digital planetarium that is virtual reality capable. So you can only imagine what we'll be able to do in there. We anticipate that once we land at Shackleton Crater, humans land again on the moon, and we establish Shackleton Base, Artemis Base, or whatever it will be called at that point, and we start a habitat on the moon. By that time, 360 video will be installed at that lunar landing base and then transmitted live stream back to Earth. Excuse me. What that will mean is that we could possibly, inside of our planetarium, have a live 360 video conferencing feed directly to our lunar base. And people will be able to purchase tickets, sit in our 360 dome, which is 70 feet in diameter planetarium, and be able to converse directly with the crew on the moon as the crowd virtually sits in the center of the landing zone. Can you only imagine that? Technology is absolutely incredible. We'll be taking advantage of all of that, of course. If you'll see in the forefront, we plan on having 2 astronomical observatories, one dedicated to the sun or daytime solar observing, which is absolutely fascinating. The other dedicated to astrophysics, which is nighttime observing. As we had discussed prior to our beginning of our program, we spent many years at the Link Observatory in Morgan County, which was built in the late 1930s and has a magnificent telescope. This is a much more modern version of the Link Observatory. We will still be having programs down there in the future, although limited because we're focusing all of our efforts on the north side here in Hamilton County. So stay tuned and watch our website for when we'll have observing sessions down at the Link Observatory. But this Grand Universe Center for Astronomy and Space Exploration will be one of the most advanced world-class observatories in America. And it'll have 12 different exhibits. It is not a museum. It's not about what we did in the past. We will not have examples of Apollo command modules or Saturn rockets. We have plenty of those around the country that are magnificent museums. We will not be looking at the past, celebrating our history. We will be looking in the present and into the future about what we're going to do. So this will be an inspiration to all, certainly to young people, helping inspire them to pursue those careers in science and technology. Our first construction project is the Technology Center, which is about 40,000 square feet. We plan on having college classrooms, bringing college classrooms with local and regional colleges to the Westfield area, college level courses through local and regional universities, evening classes for workforce development, and for STEM engagement. We are planning a mock-up of the mission control called our Deep Space Discovery Center, where young people and their families will be able to be engaged in real science in a mission control environment, which will be absolutely one of a kind and spectacular. We'll have advanced computer labs for young people and computer programming and image processing for all the new images that are coming back from our deep space exploration, STEM robotics labs and virtual learning studios, and a wide variety of things. Watch for this. Hopefully we can break ground on the Technology Center later on this year. It's a funding process right now. There's a lot of things that need to happen before we can put a shovel in the ground, but we're making great progress. As you might have read in the Indianapolis Business Journal, back in September of 2020, we signed an agreement with Purdue University as a partnership for the development of STEM education. Purdue University joins forces with Grand Universe to inspire American youth to pursue careers in science and technology. We have a direct relationship with a program called Catalyst, which is a Center for the Advancement and Teaching and Learning in STEM. And there was an IBJ article written by Greg Morris that was November of 2020 that explained that relationship. And so on the right-hand side, that was from the Current magazine in Westfield. That was just several months ago. It was called Sky is the Limit. And we were doing some video filming because we're now producing video content for a global audience in a variety of web channels so we can extend our reach around the world. And we were down in a place called Prime Lab, which is, I think, 5 levels below the physics building at Purdue in West Lafayette. And it was back during the mask days. So our filming didn't go very well because we couldn't hear anybody. But these were all prototype video productions that we were doing, and we're moving forward with that. And so Grand Universe Digital Media and Purdue University are deeply engaged together to take these to a global scale. And by the way, just one word, Greg Morris, 30 plus years, president and publisher of the Indianapolis Business Journal, retired after almost 35 years at the IBJ. In December of 2020, after a long and successful career, he is now a senior advisor and strategic planner for Grand Universe. So we're glad to have him on board, and Greg brings a lot to the table, and he's a close friend of all of ours. Congratulations to us and to Greg for joining forces in the development of such a grand plan. This is what we're producing. And with our joint, our relationship with Purdue, we inspire young audiences in amazing feats of science and technology. And one of the video productions that we do regularly is called Bringing Science to Life, where we travel America creating video series on the fascinating world of science and technology. As an example, when we landed the latest rover on Mars, Perseverance rover, which happened a few months ago, had we not been under the quarantine or a mask mandate, we would have been on site with our film crew at Mission Control at the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, California, speaking directly with the scientists and engineers involved in that program as a Purdue partner. And that would have been made into a STEM education video posted on our web channels globally. And that's what we do with Purdue. The one below that is the one that all of us are probably most excited about. It's called I Am STEM. And these are video biographies, 10 to 12 minutes long, of renowned STEM experts, STEM, of course, being science, technology, engineering, and math, that represent cultural, ethnic, linguistic, gender, and socioeconomic diversity. And there are so many young people in their mid-20s from such diverse backgrounds that are engineers for aerospace or defense or NASA that have such fascinating stories and went through such hardships to pursue their dreams. We will be visiting them and listening to their story and asking them, what first made you interested as a young person in pursuing a career as an engineer, as an example? What hardships did you go through? What challenges did you have to face? And now that you've pursued and achieved your dream, what advice would you give young people who might have the same ambitions. And we believe that this video series will touch the hearts and minds and souls of young people, not only in Indiana, not only in the US, but around the world. And so, of course, we are pursuing this with vigor. It's available on in video podcasts, social media events, virtual workshops, on all types of media devices, such as smartphones and iPads and computers, even on web-based television as web TV. We're looking for corporate sponsors to help enable these programs to be provided free of charge to all students, all schools around the world. And so corporate people and individuals themselves can all, through their generous gifts, can all help us progress as quickly as possible to make this a huge success with our relationship with Purdue. And so, to summarize, our projected outcomes for Grand Universe help Indiana take a national leadership role in STEM education. Right now, the state of Indiana is somewhere around number 25 out of 50 states. That's simply not acceptable in our mind. Indiana needs to be the leader in STEM education. Grand Universe, Purdue University, and all of our partners are going to change that. We want the state of Indiana to be the absolute leader and the epicenter for STEM education and engagement, not only in the state of Indiana and across the United States, but of the world. That's our ambition. I believe we can do it. We need all the help we can get from everyone that has an interest in those types of ambitions. We also want to promote economic development in high-tech industries and bring those high-tech industries and NASA contractors to Indiana. We want to create Indiana's future high-tech workforce, and our connection with Purdue is only growing. And so through that, we can help young people pursue those technologies, hopefully live in the state of Indiana and live here in central Indiana and be a part of our workforce, have children, raise their family, they take their kids to Grand Universe and repeat the cycle. And so we'll also enhance tourism initiatives locally, regionally, and statewide, and help bring people from all over the region, all over the country, and from around the world to come and visit us in the great state of Indiana. And so you can find us on the web at granduniverse.org. That is not granduniverse.com, it's granduniverse.org. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. All donations are tax deductible as allowed by the IRS. You can find us on the web, granduniverse.org. You can follow us on Facebook under Grand Universe Space Science Center. We have a lot of programs out there that are active, many more to come. We're excited to get started. And so we're asking for everyone's support. Let's help bring science to life. Together, I believe we can change the world. So support us. It's now Q&A time. I'm going to stop the screen share and we can take any questions that you may have. Hopefully I'll have the answers for you.
Yeah, certainly, Greg. Yeah, thank you so much. It's not often we get to hear a project of this magnitude. So we'll do one question just to respect everybody's time. We normally stop at 1 o'clock. So the one question I'm particularly curious about is, how did you happen to choose Westfield for this project?
Well, we were down in southern Indiana, or southwest of Indianapolis, and did a professional demographic survey. Because when you do something like this, regardless of where you're located, we could have been located south side, east side, central Indianapolis. We could have been right downtown. I mean, we could be anywhere. People have to travel to get there. I mean, that's just how it works. The only people who are going to get there on foot are just a few blocks away. So anywhere we locate, we're going to have to travel. So we needed to look at a thoroughfare plan. If we were going to have 1 million visitors a year, where's that going to work? And so we spoke with city officials in Carmel and Noblesville and Zionsville and Fishers. When we came to speak with Mayor Andy Cook in Westfield and looked at what they were planning at Grant Park and the new US 31 thoroughfare that had been built through this part of the state, it was obvious to us that it would work to have that little size of crowds. It would work best if we were combined with the Grand Park project. That's why we're here.
No, certainly. They're definitely getting more efficient, getting large numbers of people in and out. of that park. So no, thanks again, Greg, for your time. Just a reminder that next week will be in person. Greg, we're going to make a donation in your name to Trinity Haven, a first of its kind program in Indianapolis providing long-term housing to LGBTQ youth. And again, Greg, thanks so much for a fantastic presentation today. I think we could do a Q&A for about an hour and a half. But again, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting today. Thanks again, Greg. Good luck. I'm thrilled at the opportunity to have that observatory in our backyard. My wife and I lived in New York for 10 years and loved the Rose Hayden Planetarium out there in the Museum of Natural History. It's just breathtaking. But no, everybody, thanks again for your time. Thanks for those of you who stayed on as we went just a little bit over.
I'm sorry.
No, as that was totally worth every minute. It was a great presentation. So again, Greg, thanks for your time. We'll see everybody in person next week at the Columbia Club.
That's great. Thanks, everyone.